Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's MISys Tips and Tricks video. We have been going through the MRP series and showing you the different steps involved in setting up our system and making certain decisions before starting to run MRP. In the previous three installments of this series, we've covered firstly which way to run the MRP, whether in one step or three steps. We talked about the advantages and disadvantages. In the second installment, we talked about different demand signals related to each of the item groups for finished goods, for sub-assemblies, intermediaries, and purchase items. And finally, last week, we talked about make to order and make to stock and how our MISys setup needs to flow with our production method, production strategy. Now, having covered these, before we jump into creating our first MRP schedule, the last step we want to look at is the master data. As you know, the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. If we don't have our master data properly set up in our MISys system, then we cannot expect to get results that are accurate. So we will go through the different steps that we need to check our master data accuracy in this installment. However, please note that this is not an exhaustive list. There are many other options that will allow you to fine tune your system and have more accurate and precise results when you are running your MRP. However, these ones that we're going to cover in today's session are the must-haves. So the first step is to go to our administration and go to company options. Under accounting tab, if we have multiple locations in our accounting system, such as QuickBooks, this instance of my MISys is connected to QuickBooks, then we would have allow advanced inventory multi-location checked. That would mean both MISys and QuickBooks have multiple locations and they need to be mapped to each other to read the data correctly. You'll notice that there is a default site here. I can select that and save it. But also, in addition to selecting a default site, I need to make sure that my master files for locations are mapped correctly to the corresponding sites on the QuickBooks side. So for that, I will go to my master files, locations. I will open location 1, and you notice that in the bottom, there is corresponding accounting sales location, and it's not assigned. Even though I have my address here, I still need to make this assignment. And if in this case, location 01 is the factory, I save that, and then I move on to location 2, and in this case, it's auxiliary warehouse, and I save that. So this is an extremely important mapping that we need to do to connect our locations between our accounting system and our MISys. The next step is alternate locations. So if we have a location like our main plant and we have an offsite warehouse where, and like an auxiliary warehouse where we keep other items, we might want to add that as an alternate location to our first location. By doing that, we can then allow the MRP to use location 2 as an alternate, and it will aggregate the quantities available both in location 1 and location 2 when it is calculating inputs and outputs to come up with the requirements. Both the quantities in location 1 and location 2 will be used if we select alternate locations as an option in our MRP schedule. So once we do that, we also need to make sure that the address is correct, because whatever address we are going to be using in our purchase orders as a ship to location, that's address is going to be read from here. And if it is incorrect, our suppliers are going to ship our orders to the wrong address. So make sure to fill this out as much as possible, including telephone numbers and any other contact information. So once we have set up our locations, the next thing is to go to our suppliers. Our suppliers can have many different points of data. However, the most important ones here that we need to make sure are, first, what information from the supplier do we want to populate on our purchase order report? These are the PDF reports that we are going to be sending to suppliers. For example, most companies tend to use reference, terms, and then on delivery tab, ship via, FOB, and freight on their purchase order report. So you need to determine what you want to see in your purchase order report and make sure those are there. And at purchase order level, you can override these. This is not a requirement for running MRP properly, but it's a good add-on to have so that your purchase orders are created in a good and accurate way. But however, what is very important here is if we are planning to send our purchase orders to our suppliers with an email after the MRP has created them, we need to make sure that on the delivery tab, the PO delivery method is selected either as email or both. And then there is an actual valid email address under PO recipient's email field. This is where the POs are going to be sent to. One of the most common mistakes made here is for people to think the email address they enter here on the address tab is where the emails are going to be sent to, which is not the case. This is usually your contact information for the supplier, maybe like an account manager or whoever it might be. However, the one email address on the delivery tab is the like an order desk or the customer service where you are supposed to send your purchase order reports to. You can have multiple emails here as long as you can separate them with a semicolon or a comma. And once we have this set up as well, then we can move on to our item masters. On the item master side, it will depend whether we are looking at raw materials or assembled items. So let's take a look for purchase order related items, which are raw materials, bulk issue, and we can take a look in the stock tab. The first important one is the order lead days. This is the lead time that MISys MRP will use when it's trying to calculate your schedule and plan when purchase orders need to be placed. Because at the planning stage, MISys MRP still does not know which supplier you're going to use to issue the purchase order to. So if I go to my suppliers tab, and if I have multiple suppliers here that are possible to buy this item from, let's just add another supplier here, okay? And maybe their lead time is 10 days for this item. Because there can be a big difference between the multiple suppliers who are qualified to sell the item in question to us, MISys needs to know one supplier agnostic number for the lead time, and it reads it from this field. What we find that most clients do is they look at these lead times here and take the greater of these lead times here and enter it as the global lead time number here. So they are covering themselves in case their selection leads them to select the supplier with the longest lead time, that the items will still arrive on time if all works well. So that's the first step. The second step is to make sure that each of our items, our purchased items, have a qualified supplier. If we don't, then MRP is going to give an error saying that there is no qualified supplier for this item. There doesn't have to be a preferred supplier, but you can then also, when there are more than one suppliers for the item, select one of them or designate one of them as the preferred supplier. And obviously our items have to be active And this is extremely important that we are keeping good track of our items and our bills of materials, maintaining them well, that our bills of material are not referencing inactive items that will cause errors in MISys. So once we have fixed our items, the next step is to fix our bills of material. And let's take a look at a bill of material. What is important in a bill of material is I open the item, but we can go to the bill of material from that little hammer button. So here there is two ways for schedule. MISys needs to know how long any given manufacturing order is going to take so that it can schedule it properly in terms of completion and start date for the manufacturing order. The rudimentary scheduling happens when we don't have routing steps, when we are not using shop floor control. And it then uses assembly lead and units per lead. What this means is how many of this item can you build within the unit's assembly lead time. In this case, it's saying it takes them 2 days to build one of whatever this item is. And I know this item is a batch and the build quantity is one batch. So for them to build one of these batches, they need 2 days. So if an order comes for 4 batches, it's going to take them 8 working days, right? So this is the rudimentary planning step. If this item actually had routing steps, which this one does, then this information here we just looked at would be ignored, and MISys would use actual runtime, setup time, queue time, wait time. These are in minutes. These are per unit or per batch, and there would be a lot more detailed planning in terms of how long each manufacturing order is going to take to be completed, and MISys would do the scheduling based on that in that case. That's the scheduling part of it. The next and the final thing I want to touch on is to make sure that when you have multiple revisions for a bill of material, you have the correct revision selected as the current revision, because MRP will not ask you which BOM revision you want to use as it creates manufacturing orders, but rather it will use the current revision. So when we look at all our bills of material, we need to make sure the ones that we want to use as current are actually ticked off in these checkboxes as current revisions. And this is it for this week. And I hope this will allow you to set up your MISys system in a way that'll allow you to run the MISys MRP on a more efficient and accurate way. Hope to meet with you next week on our fifth installment, and where we will be setting up our first MISys MRP schedule.